There is no question for which compassion is not the answer. Judith Hanson Lassiter's quote seems a good place to begin to reflect on how we live into a world that is compassionate, how we begin to even conceive of such a reality. Said another way, compassion is the answer to every question in this world. Can that be true, though? It sounds a bit simplistic for a world that is complex and challenging, a world that has pain as well as pleasure, a world that scrolls on our televisions and notifications on our devices, that seems to be more chaos than order, and far more indifference than compassion. I want to talk today not about our second principle, as was talked about during our opening words, but about our sixth principle, which is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Like many of our principles, it seems like a beautiful goal, and one that feels next to impossible to achieve or even to begin at times. So where do we start? We start with our theme of this month, compassion. First, with ourselves. We will not get it right all the time, and we will never complete this task. We are still compelled to try, though, to start, to do what we can, where we can. And where we can begin to influence all that world is again with ourselves first. How we choose to be, what we choose to do, who we are in relationship with, the efforts we put our resources behind. These are things that we can influence each and every day. And they add up over time and ripple out into larger spheres of influence. I spent a good deal of time studying, living, and working at a small Methodist university in St. Paul, Minnesota, called Hamlin. Being a Methodist school, John Wesley, the leading figure in the movement that became Methodism, was often quoted around that place. Perhaps his most famous and possibly misattributed quote is this: "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can." Whether Wesley coined them or some other person, there is considerable debate as to who might have said them at this point. The words themselves are a call to us to a more compassionate way of living. What would it look like to first be compassionate, then to think about how to build a world with a bit more peace, a bit more liberty, and a bit more justice than there was before? How would congregational meetings be different? Or how would Sunday services? Or what about the programs this community offers outside of Sunday morning? Perhaps they would look much the same, but I believe that a compassion-centered, justice-centered congregation looks a bit different than most, as does a compassion-centered, justice-centered life, or a compassion-centered, justice-centered career, or family, or sports team, or company, or government. We have lots of examples in our headlines and newscasts about what it looks like when compassion is absent. We react strongly to those stories, In fact, that is why they are so pervasive. Our reactivity to negativity feeds their pervasiveness and proliferation in our headlines. We may have experienced this ourselves or read about the challenges of finding compassion in online spaces. Cyberbullying, hate groups, and misinformation campaigns all conspire to create a less compassionate digital world, and to therefore create a less compassionate physical world through our experiences of them. But this doesn't have to be the way of things. What would it look like to terraform our online spaces, and therefore our physical ones? It requires rethinking the speed, the profit margins, and the structure of places like Facebook, YouTube, and the many other areas of the internet we spend our time. Annalee Newitz's article in the recent New York Times, entitled "A Better Social Media World is Waiting for Us," lays out a few ideas for what such a world might look like. How to create better public squares for the exchange of ideas is one thing that I believe to be at the core of living out our principle of a more just, free, peaceful, and compassionate world. One, what if the starting point for online communication was that we opt in to view and interact with content? You begin not with a torrent of information, but with silence. And you curate what you see from there. Secondly, what if things were slow? One of the people interviewed for this story, Sophia Omonja Noble, a professor at the University of California of Los Angeles, calls this slow media. Instead of things happening faster and faster online, what if things slowed way down? What if people, like editors in newspapers, or like editors we used to have in newspapers, and we ourselves decided how fast we saw things and how long it took for things to post online? Instead of trying to keep up with the constant stream of new things, there would be time to think about what we were seeing or what was missing from the narrative. There would be an opportunity to consider who we wanted to hear from and what we wanted to hear about. Third, what if we communicated with people we actually knew? Those we knew or that were known by those we were close to. There could be relationships that either began online and then transitioned into physical spaces, or vice versa. But there would not be people we had long-term engagements with or received information from that we knew little about. So we would have digital spaces that were quieter, curated, slower, and built on real relationships with people we knew. This sounds a lot like what we do in religious community, to me. And perhaps the ideas we promote and practice here, and the goals of people thinking about how to be online together, better overlap quite a bit, because there is a similar goal behind both the reform of our online spaces and living a compassion-centered life overall. If we are better equipped to slow down, to be in deeper relationship, to consent to the ways we are all together, then we would have that bit more justice, that bit more compassion, that bit more liberty and peace that we are seeking in our sixth principle. President of Star King School for the Ministry, Reverend Rosemary Gray McNatt, has these words that help me see the connection between our personal spheres and seeking to create a world that reflects our deepest values. The truth is this: if there is no justice, there will be no peace. If we cannot bring justice into the small circles of our individual lives, we cannot hope to bring justice to the world. And if we do not bring justice to the world, none of us is safe and none of us will survive. Nothing that we do is more important than making justice real, here, where we are. Hard as diversity is, it is our most important task. And we begin to see the ways that we ourselves choose to interact, have deep connections with the world in which we live, whether we use the word justice or compassion, peace or liberty. Our attention, our presence in spaces can lead to more justice or to less, to more compassion or to less. Because whether we are in digital spaces or here together with one another, we are co-creating this world. What we do here and there and everywhere in between matters and contributes to that world. This does not mean that the path of compassion is an easy one. In fact, I would argue that it is a rather challenging road to travel. But as compassion and love are bound together, the absence of both is not always hate, but instead it is indifference. Indifference, or not caring enough to be bothered, is where we lose our way. It can be hard to remain impassioned, to remain focused, to remain connected to this world. And here I mean truly connected, in the deeply relational, slow, and old-fashioned way that we attempt here this morning and every week. Because the goal of so much of our world today is in fact connection. That is a worthy goal, but one that we have not always been discerning about the qualities of. Connection that is fast, transactional, and constant is not what feeds us on a human level. Here is where our reading from earlier comes in. McKeeman reminds us, ministry is a quality of relationship between and among human beings that beckons forth hidden possibilities, inviting people into deeper, more constant, more reverent relationship with the world and with one another, speaking truth to power, standing for human dignity and equity, for compassion and aspiration, struggling for human responsibility against principalities and structures that ignore humaneness and become instruments of death. And McNatt, if we cannot bring justice into the small circles of our individual lives, we cannot hope to bring justice to the world. And McKeeman, it is all these and much, much more than all of them, present in the wordless, the unspoken, the ineffable. It is speaking and living the highest we know, and living with the knowledge that it is never as deep or as wide or as high as we wish. And McNatt, nothing that we do is more important than making justice real, here, where we are. Hard as diversity is, it is our most important task. McKeeman, wherever there is a meeting that summons us to our better selves, wherever our lostness is found, our fragments united, our wounds begin healing, our spines stiffen, and our muscles grow strong for the task, there is ministry. It is for our lives to be the places that bring together the many threads before us. Our relationships are what hold this world together. Our relationships are what the world is made of. And it is the quality of our relationships that determine the quality of the world we can create from them. Here, in this community, the ministry of justice and of compassion is each of ours to do. May our relationships, wherever they may happen, do all the good they can. Be more justice today than yesterday. Value silence and pause for thought. Be slower than is possible, and understand that authenticity is more valuable than speed. And center compassion at every turn. So may it be.